The good guys are really bad guys, and the bad guys are kind of the good guys. But some bad guys are still bad guys, and then there might be a good guy who stays a good guy, and then there's a bull. It gets confusing. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Two Guns. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair from the 80s Flick Flashback podcast, he only drives 88 miles per hour, it's Tim Williams.
You never heard the saying, never rob a bank across from a diner with the best donuts in 3 counties?
Love that.
Yeah.
All right. So this was actually one picked by Tim.
Yes.
Two Guns. I knew that it was based on a comic book, and then it was something. I don't remember. How did you bring it up? Like, it was when we were doing a show together.
No, we were at the theater, and
Yeah.
you were doing research for something else.
I think it was when we were doing research for Swamp Thing.
I think it was.
Yeah.
And then, I was looking through we were talking about the app that we have that has all of our movies, and because Two Guns pops up right at the top when you open it up because it's got a numerical title, I was like, oh, Two Guns is based on a comic, right? And you were like, it is. I was like, well, if nobody's doing that one, I want to do that one because I've seen this movie several times.
And I had not. This
Right.
this was a first watch for me as I prepped for this. But so let's talk about the movie. We're going to do this we're going to lay this one out a little different than previous episodes since this is a single, I think it was 6-issue run, a contained little story. We don't have a lot to discuss, so we're going to lay this out differently. We're talking about the movie, kind of review the movie, and then as usual with our moving panels, we'll show how it connects to the comics that it is based on. But the movie was released August 2nd of 2013. I could not believe this movie is 9 years old.
I know, it's crazy.
Like, how did I go 9 years without seeing this movie?
And you call yourself a movie buff.
Yeah. Look, there's so many movies.
Look, I'm way behind. I shouldn't be talking.
And the other thing is 2013, this was also when comic book movies, they were just kind of throwing them out there to see what would stick. Because this is the same year, I think R.I.P.D. came out.
Yeah, it was around the same time because that trailer is on the Blu-ray.
Yeah, and the Wolverine came out around this time. I'm wanting to say, Kick-Ass 2, I think, was around this time too.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, this is when they were doing a lot of those. Now, I know the Wolverine's not one, but of the other ones I mentioned, a lot of kind of independent comics and getting them out there. And so this is one of those. So did you see it back in 2013, or was this you did? Okay.
Yeah, I went to the theater and saw this. Tyra and I saw this one together because we're big Denzel fans, and of course this is before Equalizer, so he'd done some kind of like action suspense. He'd done like Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 and Unstoppable, but this was like his first, to me, like straight up action movie that he was in before. Like, this is like a year or two before the Equalizer when he went straight up, action star mode. So, and then Mark Wahlberg he's not my favorite actor, but I like him and stuff. So it was interesting. That was an interesting dynamic that I was looking forward to seeing. So
yeah, they have great chemistry.
Yes.
Which I know we'll probably talk about throughout the episode. But this movie was directed by Balthazar Kormacher, is I believe how you pronounce his last name.
Well done.
Who had just directed Mark Wahlberg in Contraband.
Yes, which is also another good movie.
And that's another one I haven't seen.
Oh man, that's a good one.
But looking at his IMDb, looks like that's about it in terms of American movies.
Yeah,
looks like he does a lot of foreign films. But yeah, no, I had not seen Contraband.
Yeah, Contraband's much more in the suspense, like thriller, not suspense like scary, more like a cops, corruption, somewhat similar to this, where there's good guys who should be bad guys who should be good guys, kind of a feel to it. So I can see why Wahlberg probably suggested him for this film and got him involved.
Yeah, because I did hear that, did read that Mark Wahlberg, he was cast early on, and he kind of did a lot of his research and all. Before we get into talking about Denzel and Mark Wahlberg, Did you hear that this was almost a Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson movie?
Yes, I did read that, and I was like, ooh, that would have been a completely different type of movie for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I like that this one had a little bit more of a, in the vein of Lethal Weapon,
Mm-hmm.
48 Hours.
Mm-hmm.
It's a action movie, but with comedy.
Yeah.
It's not a comedy movie with action.
Yeah.
It's an action movie with comedy. You put Vince Vaughn and Owen Wilson in there, it's a comedy
Straight
that
up.
has action.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also a lot of, they said that Wahlberg and Denzel ad-libbed a lot of the dialogue, especially the
Yes.
banter between the two of them, which shows that they're both got some good, good comedy chops to be able to do that, which some of the lines are funny. And they're, like I said, their chemistry is great. So
Wahlberg even said in an interview that he doesn't think he's funny, but he's quick.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that quote.
That's a good one. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into this. So we got Bobby Beans, or
Mm-hmm.
Bobby Trench, played by Denzel Washington, a undercover DEA agent.
Mm-hmm.
Mr.
I know a guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What did you think about? I would say more so him than Wahlberg. He actually, Bobby Beans and Bobby Trench were two different people.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like, he portrayed Bobby Beans. His characterization was completely different when he was Bobby Beans versus when he was Bobby. I mean, he had the gold teeth.
Yeah.
The way he dressed, the hats, but it was his mannerisms, the way he spoke. I think he did a good job with that.
Yeah, he definitely gives Bobby Bones a persona that's different than Bobby Trench. Like it's definitely an act that he's putting on that's very evident when he's switching between those two roles.
And then he comes in at the end when he comes in the the red car, and he's Bobby Beans.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Even though they all already know at this point
right.
that he's really a DEA agent, he still comes in that moment as Bobby Beans.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed that. And then we've got Stig, which, from what I've gathered, Tim and I actually talked about this right before we recorded. We couldn't remember whether they say his name, but from what I found out, his name is Michael Stigman in the movie, though it's Marcus Stigman in the comic. But they just call him Stig, and that's all we'll probably refer to him.
Yeah.
But this Mark Wahlberg, this was straight off of Pain and Gain.
Yeah.
With The Rock.
Yeah.
And apparently that's the reason why he is always in long sleeves in this movie. Even though they're out in the desert, and he is always in long sleeves and like that blue jean jacket.
Right.
Because they're actually trying to hide how muscular he was at the time.
That's probably very true. Very true.
Yeah. Because they didn't want him to look like a bodybuilder.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that kind of funny.
Which I did think I think he wears a t-shirt in a few scenes, but it's not very evident. And those are probably ones they did probably later in the shoot, because I think I noticed like he doesn't look as fit as I know now. He stays in shape for a lot of his roles he does now, but so there's a few scenes where he's in a t-shirt that I could tell, it's like, he doesn't look very as muscular as I thought he was going to be, but it's very possible.
Yeah. They could have been shot later, or they were reshoots, which I do know they did. I watched this with the commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And so they didn't film this in order. They mentioned that a lot about how some things were filmed, like there was a scene much later that actually involved Bill Paxton. They talked about this was one of the first scenes they filmed, and it's like, oh wow, that's like halfway through the movie. But we talked about Denzel with his characterization. What did you even notice that Mark Wahlberg is chewing gum in almost every scene?
I read that little trivia note like as I was starting the movie, and so I could not see it after that point. Like there's one scene like when he has the yogurt, he spits the gum out. Then they get in the car after the fight scene at the girlfriend at Paula Patton's house or whatever, and then you see him put a new stick of gum in his mouth. Like he's really obsessed with gum in this movie.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting character choice. Didn't really get that. Speaking of characterization, though, what were your thoughts about the fact that he is apparently the greatest shot in the world?
Well, he did do the movie Shooter, so I mean, come on, he's got to stay somewhat in character. But yeah, I mean, kind of, once again, going back to the Lethal Weapon kind of connection, that was Riggs. Riggs was like the best shot, so I can see that somewhat being an homage if necessary. But it suits the story well as well.
Yeah. How do you take a helicopter down in one shot? You shoot the pilot.
Right, yeah. And you hope that it doesn't crash into the barn you're running into.
Although that blade comes, the propeller blade comes flying in and kills some random dude.
Right.
That we see. But, yeah, the chicken scene, that was weird. Moving on, Deb Reese, although a different name in the comics. Well, it's still Deb, but it's Deb Carnes in the comics. Played by Paula Patton, who is Bobby's partner. Although,
sort of.
in my opinion, she is made to just be she's the one female in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like literally.
Yeah.
She's the one female. I mean, other than the waitress at the cafe.
Yeah.
And the mom inside, who I think are the only other women that have lines in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Bethany would have a field day with this movie and the Bechdel test.
Yes.
Yeah. Although I will say this, and we'll get into like I said, the comic book connections later. As a movie, I still watch this thinking this character is underwritten.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, like watching it the first time was probably not as noticeable, but through multiple viewings that I've watched, I was like, she really doesn't do that much. I mean, she has a pivotal role, but they don't give any real backstory. She doesn't do anything else besides interact with the main characters when it's convenient.
So, let's go ahead and spoil it.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you're listening to this,
you've watched
you
it
need
already.
to have seen the movie before you listen to this. So we find out that she betrays them.
Mm-hmm.
Although that's something we can get into a little bit later about how that storyline plays out. But yeah, we don't really understand why she does it.
No, and yeah, it's like watching it this time. The easy quote unquote answer or the cheap answer maybe is probably the better term, is that she wanted to be loved by Bobby, and because he didn't love her, and so she wanted to get back at him by stealing money and framing him for it, which once again that's as outrageous as that is.
Yeah.
That seems to be
a woman scorned.
Right. But then of course at the end she realizes that it was the wrong thing to
they
do.
try to give her the redemption before she's killed.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That character storyline does not work.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of a character who I think doesn't work, Harold Quince, James Marsden, who is supposed to be another good guy / bad guy, who after Stig goes and talks to the Admiral, I'm still not 100% sure whether or not Marsden is working with or against the Navy.
I pretty much every time I've watched it, I'm pretty sure the Admiral is in on it, and that's just not Bobby. That's just Stig's like blind devotion, like, oh, the Admiral's he's the top of the Navy. He's going to be the one that's going to see this.
He'll be on my side.
Right.
He'll do the good thing, the right thing.
And so, which I think great cameo, Fred Ward, Remo Williams himself from the 80s flick flashback, as the Admiral, which he doesn't, if he is in on it, he doesn't let Stig know that, but it's just a little too obvious. And I think it's that there's a deleted scene as well where Stig makes a phone call to the Admiral, and he gets the secretary, and it gets forwarded to Marsden's character.
Quince,
so that seeing that deleted scene to me makes it seem even more so that the Admiral was in on it as well.
Yeah, we'll get into the story in a minute, but there's just a lot here. But what did you think of James Marsden, Cyclops?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard.
Kind of playing against character.
Yeah,
usually he's the likable.
Yeah, you got a few people like that in this one. Yeah, I mean he was fine. Once again, underused. I mean, there's not much. It falls into that trope of too many bad guys, and I know it's the
there's a lot of bad guys.
The Mexican standoff where you're wanting the multiple adversaries to come and kind of take take out each other at the end, but because
It's a cool scene.
yeah, but because you have too many quote unquote bad guys, they're not really fleshed out well enough to give them that much to do besides just be. I would say of the three between Edward James Olmos and I'm not calling him
Poppy.
Poppy, and then the CIA
Earl.
the CIA guy, they had much more of a story than
Ish.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm saying if you're comparing the three,
Yeah,
he was
compared to the three.
yeah, he was definitely at the bottom of the list with his story, even though supposedly him and Deb were the masterminds behind setting them up anyway.
Yeah,
So.
which again, very convoluted
Mhm.
story. So yeah, you mentioned Edward James Olmos. Again, 80s fame. Stand and Deliver.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be mine. Playing Manny Poppy Greco.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of this drug lord, if you will, who has a bull that he, I guess, sends after people.
Yeah.
His, I will say, his character was probably the most comic bookish of all of them because he felt like a kingpin type character.
Yeah, very much so.
The way he dressed.
Mm-hmm.
Again, him having them subjected to being attacked by a bull.
Are we gonna talk about the scene where he urinates on his hands?
Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
I was like,
yeah.
I want to know. That was in my notes. Was that in the comic, Laramy?
It is not. It is not. The bull is not in the comic. So we'll go ahead and take care of that. There's no bull anything. Yeah, but I do appreciate that he explains why he's doing it. You know, I always say, even in a fictional story, you got to have some logic.
Exactly.
And so they at least have some logic as to why he was peeing on his own hands. I don't understand why he had to do it right in front of Stig and Bobby.
Well, that's a weird scene anyway, and I wonder if that's one of those reshoots, because right before then, I know we're kind of getting more into the story, but Stig gets up like he's going to be interrogated by himself, and the next scene is they're both hanging up upside down. So I felt like there was a scene missing there, or if it was a weird, there was a different torture quote unquote scene that they ended up scrapping and did this instead.
Yeah, I do know that in the commentary they talked about wanting to do a waterboarding scene, but apparently, the movie just slipped my head. Denzel, I think, had just been
Safe House.
That was it. Safe House, where his character got waterboarded, and so they didn't want to repeat that.
Yeah. Well, they talked about waterboarding Poppy in the garage when they first captured him. So yeah.
That was a good scene. I like the visual of the being in the garage, and you know how the garage light goes out after so long.
That's still one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, but then a big, they hit him or something. A big movement turns the lights back on.
Right. I just like watching Wahlberg have to wave his hand every few minutes to get the light to come back on.
Yeah, that was great. That was a great scene. Finally, we'll wrap up with the characters. We'd already mentioned them. The late great Bill Paxton,
yes,
playing Earl, who is a CIA agent, but he's a interrogator, or I don't know what he's used for.
And see, I thought he was the most comic book villain of the three.
He was. Yeah, because his character does not. Yeah, why he's dressed like a oil baron. I didn't get that either. But yeah, anything you want to say though about? I mean, what can you say though? About
once again, kind of playing against type. I don't see like this is one of the only like bad guy roles that I can think of him. I'm forgetting something.
Frailty.
Never seen it.
Oh.
But I mean I know it's good. But yeah, that's Matthew McConaughey. Frailty. Yeah. So, but still, of his overall filmography, he doesn't normally play a bad guy, especially in an action movie like this. So, but I thought he was great. I mean, it was, he's one of the greats. And, yeah,
and his characters are always so different.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of similarity in his characters, even from movie to movie. I mean,
and you could tell
you
he
look
was
at-
having fun with it too. So
yeah, you look at a movie like Twister or Apollo 13 or
Tombstone,
Aliens.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
go down the line.
it's just it's a different character every time.
Weird Science. I guess he was somewhat the bad guy in Weird Science.
Oh
He
yeah,
was Wyatt.
I forgot he played Chet.
Yeah, it was Chet.
That's right. I forgot he played Chet.
Buttwads. Yeah, that's.
All right, so all of these main characters, I got to ask my usual question here. So if this was a continuing series, if they were to make a sequel or whatnot, even accounting for people who died, because I can tell you this, they said in the commentary that the original script had Bill Paxton, surviving.
I could see that.
I will mention that. So if they were to continue this, who would you want to see again, and who would you want to play a game of Russian roulette?
Well played, sir. Well played.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, you kind of spoiled it already. I would think Earl would be the one I would want to come back. Poppy, nah. Just because, it kind of leaves it up to like a sequel at the end because they're going to rob the other banks. I mean, he makes that line. You think that was the only bank we have? We've got hundreds of banks and money. So, they're going to, take down the other banks as well. So I could see him being a continual adversary going forward. Yeah, I would think Marsden's character is probably my least favorite of the three, but I just think that's because he's not his character wasn't as developed, I don't think. So, what about you?
No, I'm kind of in agreement. I think Bill Paxton kind of being the main, like he's always after them kind of villain, I think would be really good. But I think that also works for Poppy if they had kept Edward James Olmos in that role.
He's a close second, yeah.
Again, he's another one that you think for a minute they're just going to leave him there, and then they both,
Finish
shoot him,
off,
make sure he's dead. Yeah. So I agree with that.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Hell, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.
You know what? I had this later, but I'm going to go ahead and throw this in.
Okay.
Are you aware that there is a sequel to the comic?
No, I am not.
Yes. Now, I haven't read it,
Okay.
so I can't get into great detail, but it's called Three Guns.
Ah, okay.
And I know that they add a female character to the group.
Not Deb.
No, obviously, no, it's not Deb. Again,
Making
I don't
sure
know
she-
who it
making
is.
sure she didn't
I don't.
survive
Yeah,
in the
no, I
comic either.
don't know who it is. Again, I haven't read it. I thought
mean,
about trying to get a hold of it to read it, but I'll explain why I didn't in the second half of the show.
Okay.
But
But I could see them bringing in a totally different character for a sequel. That would make...
would you be worried though that it would fall into that, like bringing Chris Rock into the Lethal Weapon movies or bringing Rosie O'Donnell into another Stakeout or
Oh gosh, what a...
yeah.
That's almost too good of an analogy because you're like, oh gosh, that was such a bad idea. Chris Rock, well, you bring Lethal Weapon, you didn't have Leo Getz in Lethal Weapon 1, but Leo Getz makes Lethal Weapon 2 really good. So, but you're talking about females. So, well, Chris Rock isn't a female.
Well,
so,
well, I'm more talking about one that's actually going to be involved in the events of the movie with the main two characters. Yeah.
Yeah, it just depends on the character, I think. It depends on the character, depends on the chemistry between the characters is going to make a big difference. Yeah. I would need more information.
Yeah. Like I said, maybe I'll sit down and read it and we'll just have a conversation about it off the air. But like I said, I want to talk about the movie first. So let's talk about the story. We already talked about the dialogue. I think is the best part of this.
Yes.
The absolute best part of this movie. And from what I've read, from what I heard in the commentary, most of the best lines in this movie were entirely improv by Denzel Washington, Mark Wahlberg, and even Bill Paxton.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that helped with the chemistry. It helped with just the flow. It made it such a great movie. But the logic behind the story is where I have my biggest problem.
Yeah.
So, first off, I mean, and this, you can get political with this all you want. How are there this many corrupt people in the military and in government and no one knows?
Right.
Like, it really seems like you cannot trust anyone. Yeah. So that was my biggest problem with the logic, was just, geez, you know, it's,
yeah. I mean, it's like I don't want to talk too bad about the movie because I like the movie. I don't want to change my mind about it.
Yeah.
But no. But yeah. I mean, it's.
But again, you gotta have some logic.
Yeah, you got the CIA, you got the Naval Intelligence, you got DEA. Even though, well, DEA wasn't completely corrupt. It was just dead.
No, Jessup. Yeah, Jessup was.
You think Jessup was dirty too?
No. I meant he was clean.
Right, he was clean, and so
he was clean. He was RoboCop.
Yeah. So then you got, well, yes, the CIA was definitely completely dirty. Naval, it seems like they're completely. If the admiral was in on it, that's going up the chain of command. But DEA wasn't as bad. So, but yeah, But once again, it's an action movie.
I mean, even the FBI, because the FBI is there at the bank, and when Bill Paxton's character shows up and kind of is leading everything, it's an FBI agent that goes, "Hey, who is that?"
Right.
You know, but just lets him do what he does. You know, he just took the bank manager and stabbed a bunch of thumbtacks into his hand.
This is true. Yeah. But I think maybe if they know that, you know, CIA is kind of untouchable, so they don't ask too many questions.
Yeah. Here's another just small piece of movie logic. How awesome are these two guys to take numerous hits to the stomach with a baseball bat?
Yeah.
And then are still able to do sit-ups from hanging upside down to avoid the bull.
Yeah.
I mean, okay.
And there's a couple of scenes with Denzel. He got shot in the arm, which one of them was the deleted scene, because there's another deleted scene where like a little kid comes up on a horse, and when he's laying after Stig leaves him in the desert, and he tries to get up, and he puts all the weight on the arm that he's been shot in. And I'm like, yeah, you probably would wince a little bit if you try to do that, especially because they hadn't sealed it up yet. And then there's a few scenes later where in the fights or whatever that arm would be hurting a lot more than he shows. Yeah,
because you're talking, what, a 3-day story spans 3 days.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He didn't have time to heal.
Yeah, being shot in the shoulder, yeah, he wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the stuff he does.
And then, I don't want to spoil the ending, but he shoots Stig in the leg. You're about to walk. At least wait till you get, don't make it worse by I was like, are they going to walk to a car to drive? Because they just start walking down this road. And there's like...
Yeah, because because the car Wahlberg came in, got shot up, and then
Denzel blew up his car.
Denzel blows up the car he showed.
But there were like 3 vehicles there to the right. I think they could have, probably got into.
They can probably find one.
But that it's still a funny scene at the end. But I was like, shoot him in the leg? Really? You're about to walk. You shoot him, now you're going to carry him. So what logic is that?
All right. This is my final little piece of logic, but this is more of how well they did the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Was it clear to you? Because it was not clear to me until a second watch.
Okay.
Was it clear to you to understand how Bobby figures out where the money is?
Yes. The first time I saw it. You mean like exactly the motel room, or where?
Yes,
the motel room?
knowing that it's in the motel room.
Yeah. Well, when
was it clear to you?
Yes.
How he figured that out?
Yes, because she moved the ring at the beginning, and they showed him at the hotel, the motel. So
Yeah.
when he found her body, because I noticed when right before she, her demise, you could see that she was moving the ring, and I was like, okay, she's leaving a signal. And then for him to come in and see the ring, then yeah, that made sense to me.
I got to be honest, it was not clear to me the first time around.
Gotcha.
I don't think they emphasized it enough. I just
now, and of course, I've seen it several times since the first time, and I think maybe the first time I knew the ring meant going to the hotel. Like when he showed up, I was like, oh well, she changed the ring. That's why he's there. I probably didn't realize that he thought that's where the money was. It was just more or less that he was like, oh, I'm going to go, to the hotel room. Like multiple viewings, I'm like, oh, she's telling him where the money is at that point. But I don't think I realized that I may not have realized it the first time. But like I said, I've seen it.
I said,
I've seen it like 4 or 5 times.
I just don't think it wasn't emphasized enough.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think it was a good little piece of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I just don't think it was emphasized enough for the average viewer, especially like I said on a first watch.
Yeah.
To figure out that that's how he knows where the money is.
I will say, going back and watching it, I don't appreciate the beginning as much. Like it's a great opening scene, but then it jumps back in time, and then it goes back to the.
it's the Pulp Fiction.
Yeah. And so like that, the time jumps, or it's a little too choppy for me because the movie doesn't stay that way after that point. Yeah. It's only for that first 20 minutes of the movie maybe. So that in multiple viewings, that the beginning kind of irritates me because I'd rather they just showed it how it happened instead of, or maybe one flashback, but not jumping back too much.
Yeah, I could see that. I kind of liked it. I think I just like the banter between the two.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Having the big explosion, kind of to be the set piece for the opening of the movie.
Yeah.
But let's get into that to kind of steal from your podcast. What was your favorite scene?
Ooh, and I should have been prepared for this. Favorite scene.
Well, while you think, I'll go ahead and share mine.
Go ahead, yeah.
Mine is the after they kidnap Poppy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the car chase / fight.
Yeah.
Because it's a car fight.
Right. Yeah,
that's what it is. It's a car fight.
Yeah.
I especially love the stunt where they spin the cars and they end up
smashing
door to door, window to window, and then they just start punching each other.
Yeah.
And then they end up, Mark Wahlberg goes through the window and they could go out the other side and they're on the ground. He goes, all right, you let go. You let go.
On the count of 3.
1, 2, 3.
See, this is why I can't trust you.
See, I told you. Yeah. It's like two brothers fighting,
and that's
what made it so great.
Yeah, I was going to say that's in the rare instance of a movie to show what a real fight looks like. It's not this standing choreographed fight. It's like two guys just rolling around on the ground, just trying to get their punches in when they can. Very much like you said, like a brothers fight or whatever. So yeah, that's definitely a great scene. There's a few like I like the scene when Bobby's coming to Stig in his apartment, and of course Stig's on the building across the way with the sniper rifle,
playing his character from Shooter.
Yeah, exactly. And he's helping lead him out, and with the Navy team coming in after him. Just a good action scene and just kind of well done. And I like the end.
Although did the Navy guys not hear the gunshot that when Denzel Washington shoots the mirror? Like,
I don't think they were there yet. Because they pulled.
I thought it was right after that.
Because he does that and they're kind of talking and he's like, oh, we got some more. That's when they end up showing up at that point. So, but yeah, and then of course the end when he blows up the car, which kind of starts that whole standoff is pretty cool.
The back-to-back gunshot, which is
the poster, and the money falling down from the explosion. Those. I mean, I can't say there's there's not one iconic scene I can think of besides that scene of them back-to-back, which of course is the movie poster. But it has some decent action sequences. But like I said, I think the banter between the two of them is what drives the movie. There's moments of them, their quips, we're gonna do it together. Well, no, we're be in the vicinity. Yeah,
Yeah.
like together. Well, in the area. Together. No, like in the, maybe the same county.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff is what, to me, that's why I enjoy going back and watching it again. It's not so much the story, it's not so much the action pieces, which are fun, but like that, hearing that banter is what ups the entertainment quadrant for me.
Yeah, and I think that's where I would compare it more to. I would compare it probably. It's closer to a movie like 48 Hours than it is to something like Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Very true. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do you miss the days of VHS tapes and VCRs and video rental stores? Is the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? If you want to go back to school, back to the future, or even back to the beach, then the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast is for you. I'm Tim Williams, the creator and host, and on each episode, I'm joined by a guest co-host as we revisit a different 80s flick to discuss our first-time watch memories, iconic scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories along the way. New episodes drop every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast.
All right, so let's get into the moving panels. Let's talk about the comic book connections. This, like I said earlier, this is a single, self-contained comic. It was released as, I think, 5 or 6 individual issues, although I read the collection altogether. But it was first published. The first issue came out in April of 2007. It was published under Boom Studios, which is a small company, which... even though they do have some originals like Two Gun was, they also release several comics that are from licensing agreements.
Oh, okay.
There's a Big Trouble in Little China comic released by Boom Studios.
Oh, man. I'm on Amazon when we get off this call.
There's a Bill and Ted comic
cool.
released by Boom Studios. And Die Hard Year One, which I actually own several copies of.
Very cool.
Which is about when John McClane was first starting off as a cop in New York. And that's just to name a few. They have several others. I actually found out that in, I think it was 2000, Fox Studio actually bought a minority share of Boom Studios. Okay. Which now means Disney owns a minority share of Boom Studios.
Yeah, that's what that means.
But they also, even aside from that, Boom Studios had an agreement with Pixar. So they're the ones that produce the Toy Story comic, the Finding Nemo comic, Incredibles comic. So again, small little company, but sounds like they've got a bunch of comics out there that people would be interested in. But the Two Guns comic was written by Stephen Grant, a writer who got started off in the 1980s. And he was actually the guy behind the revival of The Punisher in the late 80s.
Okay.
That character kind of reached a lull in the 80s. And this is the writer who kind of brought him back from that. He's worked with both Marvel and DC. He's actually behind the kind of revival as well of the Challengers of the Unknown from DC, for anybody who is nerd enough to know who they are. He's also the guy who adapted RoboCop into a comic book.
Very cool. I think I had a few RoboCop comics back in the day.
Yeah, that were very loosely connected.
Very loosely.
Yeah. And then I had kind of hinted at earlier, Robert John Burke, who plays Jessup in this movie, he actually took over the role of RoboCop in RoboCop 3.
Gotcha. I knew he looked familiar.
You may not have known that.
Yeah.
Because RoboCop 3 did come out in the 90s. It did not come out in the 80s.
But I saw it. I haven't seen as much as the first one. It's first one was great, second one, third one's only because I watched the first two.
Yeah, I think I've seen the third one once. And then the artwork of the comic is from Mateus Santaluco, if I pronounce his last name correctly, who is also famous for drawing most recently the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics. So, Yeah, so a couple of guys with a lot of other big connections in comics there. But before we get into the connections, I'm just going to ask you, is there a scene or any scenes in particular that you feel like came straight from this comic book?
Well, I asked you about the, Poppy's infamous peeing on his hand scene, but no.
Yes, that is not.
A part that I thought was probably from the comic.
Like other than obviously basic plot, because obviously plot. But is there a thing you think they took frame by frame, panel by panel, they just brought it to life?
I would only think like maybe some of the action sequences, like Bobby in Stig's apartment, that scene maybe, or even like them blowing up the car at the end. I could see that as being a comic kind of a splash page or whatever. Even the way they slowed it down in the movie with that kind of that blurred look gave it a very comic look. So
it would probably make for a great panel. It is not, however, in this comic.
Right. So those are the only two that really stand out to me.
Yeah. No. The movie's writer, Blake Masters, who wrote the screenplay, I found it in an interview. He stated the graphic novel was the spine of a great plot.
Okay.
That gives you any indication as to how much he actually used.
Yeah.
Pretty much he used the idea.
Yeah.
But there's really nothing that comes straight out. What I mentioned earlier about Stig being a good shot, that's not played out in the comic. There's one line. Deb is actually the one who tends to Bobby after he is shot by Stig. And Deb says that the guy who shot you is either a really good shot or a really bad one. And that's really the only connection to Stig, shooting him in a way that he knew he would survive. The bank robbery is probably one of the closest scenes.
Yeah.
They do go into the police station first, and they lock up all of the cops into the jail cells. There's even a scene where they have to get one of the cops called into the station.
Do they wear the masks?
Yes, they do wear the mask. However,
Frankenstein and clown mask.
Well, it's a Frankenstein and a vampire mask in the comic, and it's funny. Stig actually wears the Frankenstein mask, whereas in the comic he asks, "Which one do you want to wear?" Right. Although I kind of would have found it weird for Bobby to wear that clown mask, because the clown mask had like a white, like it was only the front of it painted, and then it looked like a white head on the back. Those were some really elaborate masks.
They were, yeah.
Because it almost looked like they were form fit to their face. But yes, they do wear the masks. But it's also flipped. Bobby's the one doing all of the work.
Okay.
So Bobby's the one that goes in, and although it's a lot more of elaborate, the money's like hidden behind a false wall.
Okay.
That the bank manager has to push a button to open. And there's no mention about there being more money than expected.
Okay.
Like they know that I think it's $50 million in the comic, where it's $40 million in the movie. I don't know why the $10 million difference, but according to the commentary, it had to do with knowing how much they would be able to like transport.
Okay.
And the director said that because Denzel had done American Gangster, like Denzel knew exactly like how much weight,
right?
Like a wad of cash was.
That's awesome.
But yeah, the money belonging to the CIA. That's of course, part of the story. So that's probably the closest. Then you got little bits and pieces. So there is a CIA guy who is going after them. It's not the character Earl. This guy they just call the Scowl. I don't know why they call him the Scowl.
Very comic book name.
Yeah, but he's just a typical man in black. The black suit, sunglasses. He's the one after them. There is a moment where he plays Russian roulette,
Okay.
but he does it with Stig.
Okay.
And he's pointing the gun directly at his head.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, he says, "Where's the money?" And I don't know. Click. Where's the money? I don't know. Click. So similar to the scene where Earl's doing it to Bobby's knee,
Mm-hmm.
but again, different. The CIA do gun down Jessup, just like happens in the movie.
Okay.
Although they do it in his office
Instead of his house.
Yes, but let's go back to the logic here. The CIA gunned down
A DEA agent.
a DEA agent
Mhm.
in his office.
Yeah. Probably not the smartest plan.
I don't know how that works.
Well, just like the movie Stig's plan of going and getting the money off the military base. Not well thought out.
That's also from the comic, though.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, that's actually from the comic. They do break into a naval base. They however, use fake IDs
Okay.
that they get from going to another scene that's in the movie. They get from a friend of Stig's.
Mm-hmm.
Although in this one, he's not a former a guy who fought with Stig. He's a guy that fought with Stig's dad in Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
So he's an older
Gotcha.
guy. But they go and get weapons and IDs from him, and they use the fake IDs to get into the naval base. And the difference here, though, is when they are looking for the commander, they go to the commander's house on the base.
Mm-hmm.
He's gone. They see on his calendar that he's supposed to be leaving for Southeast Asia that night. So they take off to the helicopter pad, only to find everyone shot dead at the helicopter pad, including the commander.
Okay.
And then the money's gone. He's supposed to have the money. So again, that's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's in there. The Mexican mob part is there, although it's not a guy named Poppy, it's a guy named Manny, who also doesn't seem to be the main boss.
Okay.
Whereas Poppy more feels like he's the main
Oh,
boss.
yeah.
This one, it's a guy named Manny, and he knows immediately that Bobby is a DEA agent because the comic starts off with Bobby finding out that they had to let Manny go because of not enough evidence or whatnot to hold him. And so Manny already knows that Bobby's DEA because Bobby's the one that arrested him. So we do have that aspect. And then we got the Deb stuff. And this is where I kind of want to talk about
Okay.
this. So Deb does betray them
Mm-hmm.
in the comic. But it is the big reveal at the end.
Okay.
So it's all of a sudden they figure out, you have where Manny gets them to go get the money, and then they find out that Manny is holding Deb hostage, just like you see in the movie. But there's no hint that Deb is the bad guy at this point.
Okay.
Then when Bobby is able to get back there, he actually uses the scowl. He uses the CIA to get back to Manny's compound,
Mm-hmm.
only to find everybody dead, including Manny.
Okay.
But then there's no Deb. And then they start kind of putting it all together that Deb's the one behind it all. It's a really convoluted story, and I won't get into too much to kind of explain Bobby's long speech that he gives when he figures it all out. But you find out that same connection, her boyfriend is Quince.
Okay.
Quince is a character in the comic, although he's not connected to the Navy.
Okay.
Or at least I don't think he is. That was another part that was kind of very unclear.
Okay.
It looked more like he was just a hired assassin, kind of, a hitman.
Gotcha.
But that is her boyfriend. You find out that she's the one that killed Manny. Quince killed everybody else, but she's the one that killed Manny. But then there's this other twist. You find out that she is Stig's commander's daughter.
Okay, that's another twist.
But understand this. She's got the relationship with Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the physical relationship, being his DEA partner,
Right.
but then she's also the daughter of Stig's boss.
How does that
So
work?
she's connected she's connected to both of them.
Right.
But they don't explain that she was the one that manipulates how they get together.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I get into that logic of
Mm-hmm.
the logic doesn't make sense. But then you also find out maybe the commander was dirty, which, you and I talked about whether that admiral
Mm-hmm.
was dirty. Again, this is also not clear because in that whole last scene, there's a line where it mentions that her dad was supposed to meet her and Quince at the end with the money, but then there's a line saying where Quince says he was going to betray us. He was going to Southeast Asia. He was going to use the money for good things, which, the admiral kind of says, you know what we could use this money for,
Right.
which I still think kind of makes him dirty. But then you find out that Quince is the one who killed the commander, which means he killed Deb's father. And Deb doesn't know until that moment. And so you still get your little 4-way Mexican standoff, but it's, just between Bobby, Quince, Stig, and Deb. But then when this comes down, of course, Deb then turns on Quince and then goes to aim her gun at Quince, and then Quince shoots Deb in the head.
Whew. It's the same demise
And then
in both versions.
Yeah. Of course, then Bobby and Stig then just gun down Quince. And that's your end. I mean, in a way, that's your end.
Gotcha.
That's now the scowl all of a sudden shows up. So imagine like Earl's character just now showing up after everybody's
After
dead.
the fact, yeah.
Yeah. And he says, I believe that money belongs to us. And they just toss him the bag of the money, which apparently, as we saw this $40 million in the movie, apparently $50 million fits inside a duffel bag in the comic.
It's all really big bills.
Yeah. Actually, I think it is, because there's a line after the robbery. I didn't mention this. Again, there's a lot of this comic that's different. After the robbery, they come out of the bank, and there's a bunch of townspeople there that are going to attempt to stop them. But Bobby says, hey, we didn't steal your money. This is dirty money that we stole. And then tosses them, like just throws money up into the air. And Stig says, those are $1,000 bills.
Okay. All right. If those exist.
Yeah, I was about to say, I've never seen a $1,000 bill. But in this universe, there's $1,000.
Right,
But yeah,
right.
So the scowl shows up. He says, this is our money. He takes the money and then just leaves them. And he just walks away. And then you still have that same moment like you talked about where Bobby shoots Stig in the leg. And then the last panel of the comic, Stig then turns to Bobby. He goes, you realize this now makes you the designated driver. And that's the end of the comic. So there you go.
So which story version do you like better, or are you kind of
the movie?
Okay,
the movie.
The movie is better.
Yes, this story is so dull. This comic is so boring.
Wow.
I have read through it 2 times since you and I discussed doing this one, because like I said, I was not familiar with it before. I knew it was a comic, but I was not familiar with either the movie or the comic. I mean, the most interesting aspect is the whole scenario of 2 undercover cops that
don't know they're undercover,
don't realize they're undercover, but that is blown in the first, you would say first issue of these, 5 issues.
Right.
And so they take that away immediately. Whereas to me, that would have made a great kind of
full run
storyline for the first like half.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
But I can see why the screenwriter would say, I see a premise here that would work for a movie that we just kind of pull what we need from it to keep the title, but it's a totally different.
Yes.
Or not totally different, but very different story.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that brings us into our final decision. Do we bag it, stack it, or trade it? So go ahead, Tim. Tell us what you would do and why.
This doesn't have the same level of honor that you would give to the top tier, so I would stack it. It's not a trade. I enjoy this movie. like I said, I own it. I've watched it several times. So yeah, it's stack it for me.
Yeah, it's a stack it for me too. If we were talking about and you talked about owning the movie, I own the comic. I bought the comic to read,
Right.
even though I probably could have read it online for cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
I did buy the comic, but honestly, if I was saying what I was going to do to the comic, I would trade it.
Yeah, I could see that.
I would trade it. I will never pick this comic up and read it again. Not unless someone wanted to do another, if I was on another podcast
Right.
and they wanted to talk about Two Guns.
Right.
Again, as I've talked about throughout this episode, does the story make sense? Not really,
Mm-hmm.
but it's fun.
Yeah, it's entertaining.
It's predictable.
Yeah.
But it's entertaining. I love Wahlberg and Washington's chemistry together.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see them in something that maybe got turned into a franchise.
Yeah.
Where they get to do more than one of these.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love that they played the everyman action stars,
Mm-hmm.
like Bruce Willis made famous. Because they can't be killed or
or seriously injured.
Yes, like we talked about with him getting shot.
Mm-hmm.
They can't. But yeah, it's definitely a stack it for me as well. It's a fun movie. I would recommend this movie, but like you said, it's just out of it being because again, we talked about at the very beginning of this. This movie came out 9 years ago, and I had never seen it. So it's not a movie that gets talked about a lot.
No, it didn't do as well, I think, at the box office as they hoped. And it was a late summer release, which sometimes kind of gets, into July, beginning of August. People were kind of burnt out on, quote unquote blockbuster movies. And so it wasn't, not that it was trying to be a blockbuster quality, but you still got you're putting two top bill movie stars in a movie together. I think they expected it to make a little bit more money, which is probably why it didn't. No sequel has been announced for this one.
Yeah, and you would think it's been 9 years, probably not going to happen.
I mean, look, Denzel's about to make Equalizer 3. I think he would have snuck a Three Guns in there at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we can't say never because they have made sequels. Although usually it's sequels of movies that were franchises, and then they made another one several years. I don't know. We'll see. But and like I said, I've never read Three Guns. Maybe Three Guns is a better story. But in terms of the comic, Two Guns do not recommend Two Guns the comic, but I do recommend Two Guns the movie.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim. You got anything coming up on the 80s Flick Flashback that you want to discuss?
So coming up, let's see. Well, just recently, of course, and we got 3 episodes in the month of April. If you haven't gone back and listened to me, Laramy, and Ron West talk about Batman, definitely go back and check that one out. And then I had great fun with Jerry D from Totally Rad Christmas Podcast. We talked about Fletch, which was a fantastic episode. Enjoyed that one. But coming up, actually, I guess next week, you and I will be talking about Friday the 13th, Part 3, which was in 3D.
3D.
So
the one where he gets the mask.
Yes, we finally see the iconic mask. And then,
mask.
So, and then coming up in June, I'm going to wrap up the season with a Back to the Future super episode 2-parter. We're going to talk about the entire trilogy, which I know the third one came out in 1990, but it was filmed the same time as Part 2. So in my book, it's still an 80s movie. So look forward to that one. So check it out.
And I have thoughts on that one.
We all have thoughts on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, you hear all about my logic behind movies. I have thoughts about Back to the Future. Yeah, so you got to check those out. 80s Flick Flashback, always great. And Tim's doing some fun stuff on TikTok as well. So check him out on TikTok as well. Check us out on TikTok. Yeah. I don't post as frequently as Tim does, but I'm trying to do better. But give both shows the likes on all of the social medias and all of the podcasting apps. Like and subscribe us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the above. And subscribe to both of our shows. I mean, if you're a movie buff, you got it coming from the 80s. You got me coming from the comic book aspect of it. So you get a lot of movie content from the two of us, and it's always fun to listen to. But for today, thank you so much, Tim. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
I appreciate it. Always a good time with you, Laramy. Anytime you need me, I'm a good shot, so just let me know.
And I thank you for introducing me to this movie, although I do not thank you for introducing me to this comic. So,
well, I got one of them, so I can't complain too much.
All right, thanks everybody for today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.